Before we begin, if you enjoy deep, emotional stories about secrets and second chances, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a chapter of this journey. I remember the exact moment I realized that keeping a secret was the only way to save my life. I'm 34 now, sitting on the porch of a beautiful farmhouse in Napa Valley, watching the sunset bleed across the vines. To my husband, Mark, and his two teenage kids, I'm just Sarah, the woman who stepped into their lives 3 years ago and helped mend their broken hearts. They know me as the kind, slightly clumsy woman who loves old books and makes a mean lasagna. They don't know that I actually own the soil they're standing on. They don't know that the sprawling multi-million-dollar winery next door belongs entirely to me. And honestly, that lie is the only reason I'm still breathing. When I met Mark, I was a ghost of a person. I had just escaped a marriage that felt like a slow-motion car crash. My ex-husband, Julian, was the kind of man who didn't just want your love, he wanted your soul, your autonomy, and every cent in your bank account. He was charming to the world, but a monster behind closed doors. When I finally walked away, I didn't just leave him, I went into hiding. I changed my name, moved 3 states away, and buried my past under a mountain of legal paperwork and offshore trusts. I had inherited the Silver Vine Winery from my grandfather, but I kept my name off the public records, using a complex web of LLCs to stay anonymous. To the town, the winery was run by a faceless corporation. To Mark, I was just a freelance graphic designer looking for a fresh start. I met Mark at a local hardware store. He was struggling with a broken sprinkler head and looked so genuinely frustrated that I couldn't help but step in. He was a widower, a high school history teacher with a tired smile and eyes that held a world of grief. He wasn't looking for a paycheck or a status symbol. He was just looking for someone to hold a conversation with after his kids went to bed. We fell in love over cheap coffee and long walks through the very vineyards I secretly owned. He would point at the lush grapes and say, "Can you imagine owning something like that, Sarah? The stress must be enormous. I'm glad we have our simple life." I would just nod, my heart hammering against my ribs, and agree that simple was better. The guilt used to eat me alive. Every time Mark complained about the rising rent in our small town, or every time his daughter, Chloe, cried because we couldn't afford the elite soccer camp she dreamed of, I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them that I had millions sitting in an account. I wanted to tell them that they would never have to worry about money again. But I saw what money did to people. I saw how Julian used it as a leash. I saw how his family turned into vultures the moment they smelled wealth. I needed to know for the first time in my life that I was loved for who I was, not for what I owned. I needed to know that if the winery burned to the ground tomorrow, Mark would still look at me with that same adoration. Mark's children, Chloe and Leo, weren't easy at first. They were protective of their father's heart, and rightfully so. They had lost their mother to cancer 5 years prior, and they viewed any new woman as an intruder. I spent months earning their trust. I didn't buy them off with expensive gadgets or designer clothes, even though I could have bought the entire mall. Instead, I showed up. I went to every game, helped with every late-night essay, and listened when they talked about their mom. Slowly, the walls came down. I became Sarah, the person they turned to when they were hurt or happy. If they knew I was the wealthy mogul the town whispered about, that organic bond would have vanished instantly. They would have seen me as a provider, a bank, or a target, not a mother figure. But secrets have a way of growing, much like the vines in the valley. They start small, but eventually they wrap around everything until you can't see the structure underneath anymore. The pressure started to build when the winery faced a massive legal challenge from a rival developer. As the anonymous owner, I had to take secret meetings in the middle of the night, taking work calls in my car while Mark slept. I was living a double life. By day, I was the woman clipping coupons to save $5 on groceries. By night, I was the CEO making decisions that affected hundreds of employees. One evening, Mark came home looking defeated. He sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. He told me the school district was considering layoffs and his job was on the line. He looked at me with such vulnerability, apologizing for not being able to provide the security he thought I deserved. My heart broke into 1,000 pieces. The checkbook in my purse could have solved all his problems in 10 seconds. I could have bought the school district if I wanted to. But I just sat there, rubbing his back, telling him we would find a way. I felt like a fraud. I felt like a monster for watching him suffer when I had the cure in my pocket. But I knew that the moment I revealed the truth, the us we had built would change forever. He is a proud man, a good man. If he found out I'd been lying for 3 years, would he see the protection or would he only see the betrayal? Then the unthinkable happened. A letter arrived at our house. It wasn't addressed to Sarah Miller, my new identity. It was addressed to the owner of the Silver Vine. Julian, my ex-husband, had found a crack in the legal wall I built. He didn't know I was the owner yet, but he was suing the winery for unpaid debts from our marriage. A complete lie, of course, but a legal nightmare nonetheless. He was coming to Napa to oversee the litigation. He was coming to my territory. My two worlds were about to collide, and I realized that if I didn't play my cards perfectly, I would lose the winery, my new family, and the woman I had worked so hard to become. The tension is rising as Sarah's past begins to bleed into her present life with Mark and the children. The arrival of that legal notice felt like a cold blade pressing against my throat. Julian was a predator. He had a sixth sense for weakness and an even sharper nose for money. For years, I had successfully lived as a ghost, but now the shadows were closing in. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, listening to Mark's steady breathing beside me. He looked so peaceful, so blissfully unaware that the woman he shared a bed with was currently calculating how to win a legal war against a madman without blowing her cover. I felt like an actress who had forgotten her lines in the middle of a play, desperately trying to improvise while the audience watched. The next morning, I told Mark I had a freelance project that required me to go into the city for a few days. It was the first big lie that felt heavy on my tongue. He kissed me forehead, told me he was proud of my hard work, and promised to handle the kids. As I drove away from our modest home, I watched him in the rearview mirror, a man who loved me for my soul, and I wondered if this was the beginning of the end. By the time I reached the glass-walled offices of my legal team at the Silver Vine, Sarah, the housewife, was gone. Sarah, the CEO, had returned. My lead attorney, Marcus, looked grim as he handed me the brief. Julian wasn't just suing for money. He was claiming that the initial investment for the winery came from marital assets we shared years ago. It was a lie, of course. My grandfather had left me the land in a private trust long before I ever met Julian. But Julian had forged documents before. He was seeking a discovery phase, which meant he would get to see the names behind the LLCs. If he saw my name, he wouldn't just take the money. He would come for me. He would find out where I lived. He would find Mark. "We can settle," Marcus suggested, leaning back in his leather chair. "It's a few million. To you, it's a drop in the bucket. It makes him go away." "No," I said, my voice colder than I realized. "If I give him a drop, he'll want the ocean. And if he finds out I'm alive and thriving, he'll never stop until he's destroyed everything I love. We fight this, but we fight it from the shadows." While I was managing the legal firestorm, things at home were reaching a breaking point. Chloe, Mark's daughter, was becoming increasingly observant. At 15, she had a built-in lie detector. One afternoon, after I'd returned from a particularly grueling work trip, I found her sitting on my porch steps. She didn't look angry. She looked suspicious. "You're different lately, Sarah," she said, not looking up from her phone. "Dad thinks you're just stressed about work, but you've got this look in your eyes, like you're constantly looking for an exit." My heart skipped a beat. "I'm not looking for an exit, Chloe. I promise. I'm just dealing with some things from my past that I never expected to come back. Is it an ex? She asked, her eyes finally meeting mine. If someone is hurting you, you can tell us. Dad would do anything for you. We would too. The sincerity in her voice nearly broke me. I wanted to pull her into a hug and tell her that she was safe, that she would never have to worry about college tuition or her father losing his job because I had more money than we could spend in 10 lifetimes. But how do you tell a child that your entire identity is a carefully constructed mask? I just squeezed her hand and told her I was okay, but I wasn't. A week later, Julian arrived in Napa. He stayed at the most expensive resort in the valley, ironically one that I held a minority stake in. He started making noise, frequenting the local bars and restaurants, playing the role of the aggrieved businessman looking for what was rightfully his. It was only a matter of time before he crossed paths with someone I knew. The collision happened on a Tuesday. I was at a local bistro meeting a vineyard manager when I heard that voice, that smooth, manipulative baritone that used to haunt my dreams. Julian was standing at the bar, 2 seats away from Mark. My blood turned to ice. Mark, being the friendly guy he is, had struck up a conversation with a tourist. I watched from the back of the room, hidden by a pillar. I saw Julian buy Mark a drink. I saw them laughing. To Mark, Julian was just a wealthy guy from the city. To Julian, Mark was just some local teacher. Julian didn't know who Mark was yet, but the proximity was terrifying. If Julian saw me walk up to Mark, the game was over. My secret would be out, and Julian would realize exactly how to hurt me. He wouldn't sue the winery. He would target the man I loved. I had to leave the bistro through the kitchen, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I sat in my car, shaking, realizing that my silence was no longer just protecting my heart, it was protecting Mark's life. Julian was a man who used people as pawns. If he knew I loved Mark, Mark would become a target. That night, Mark came home buzzing with excitement. I met the most interesting guy today, Sarah, a businessman named Julian. He's in town for some legal stuff, but he's actually looking for some local investment advice. He mentioned he needs a local assistant for a few weeks to help him navigate the area. The pay is incredible. It would cover all our bills and then some. I felt like the room was spinning. Mark, no, you can't take that job. Why not? He asked, his smile fading into confusion. Sarah, we're drowning. This is a godsend. Why are you so against it? I have a bad feeling about him, I stammered. A bad feeling? You haven't even met him. Mark's voice rose, a rare sign of frustration. I'm trying to take care of this family, Sarah. Since you won't tell me what's going on with your work projects, I have to do something. We can't live on bad feelings. For the first time since we met, we went to bed angry. The distance between us in that bed felt like a canyon. I lay there in the dark, realizing that my secret was now actively tearing my marriage apart. If I stayed silent, Mark would work for a monster. If I spoke up, the life we built would vanish. I decided then that I couldn't just play defense anymore. If Julian was going to use his wealth and power to infiltrate my life, I would have to use mine to end him. I stayed up until 3 a.m., sending encrypted emails to my legal team and my private investigators. I told them to stop playing nice. I told them to find every skeleton in Julian's closet, every tax evasion, every forged signature, every broken contract. I want him gone, I wrote, not just out of Napa. I want him ruined. But as I hit send, a terrifying thought crossed my mind. If I become the monster to defeat the monster, will Mark even recognize the woman I've become? This concluding chapter focuses on the climax, the revelation, and the emotional resolution of Sarah's journey. The next 48 hours were a blur of calculated moves and silent prayers. I had authorized my legal team to launch a full-scale offensive against Julian. But I knew that paper trails and courtroom battles wouldn't be enough to stop a man like him from making contact with my family. I had to face him. I had to do it before Mark signed any contract or spent another minute in his company. I arranged a meeting at the Silver Vine's private tasting room, a secluded stone-walled cellar that smelled of oak and ancient secrets. I didn't send an attorney. I sent a simple, anonymous note to Julian's hotel saying, "If you want the truth about the winery, come alone." When the heavy wooden doors creaked open, Julian stepped in, looking every bit the arrogant predator I remembered. He was adjusting his silk tie, a smirk playing on his lips. But when his eyes landed on me, sitting at the head of the long mahogany table, the smirk vanished. For the first time in my life, I saw Julian stumble. "Sarah?" he whispered, his voice cracking. You're dead. I had people look for you for years." "I wasn't dead, Julian. I was just finally free of you," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. "I am the owner of the Silver Vine. I am the woman you've been trying to sue, and I'm the woman who is going to destroy you if you don't leave this valley by sunrise." He recovered quickly, his eyes narrowing with a familiar, toxic greed. "Well, well, my little runaway bride is a mogul. This is better than I imagined. Do you have any idea what the community property laws will do to this place? Half of this is mine, Sarah, and if you don't play nice, I'll make sure your simple life with that pathetic schoolteacher is burned to the ground." "You won't touch Mark," I said, leaning forward into the light. "I have the files, Julian. My investigators found the offshore accounts you used to hide money from your partners in Chicago. I have the evidence of the fraud you committed 3 years ago. If you file one more motion, if you speak one more word to my husband, I'll send those files to the feds. You won't be getting half a winery. You'll be getting 20 years in a federal cell." The silence in the cellar was suffocating. We stared at each other. Two people who had once promised to love each other, now locked in a cold war of survival. I saw the calculation in his eyes. He realized he had lost. I had more money, more evidence, and more to lose, which made me more dangerous. Without a word, he turned and walked out of the cellar. I collapsed into the chair, the adrenaline leaving my body in a rush of cold sweat. It was over. Julian was gone, but the hardest part was still ahead. I drove home slowly. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows over the vines. When I walked through the front door, the house was quiet. Mark was sitting at the kitchen table, a single lamp illuminating a folder of papers in front of him. My heart sank. It was the contract Julian had offered him. "He left town," Mark said, his voice flat. "Julian called me an hour ago, said he was moving on to a better opportunity, and the job was off. He sounded terrified." Mark looked up at me, and I saw the hurt in his eyes. He wasn't stupid. He had connected the dots. "I went to the winery today, Sarah. I went there to see if they were hiring administrative help. I saw your car parked in the private executive lot. I saw the staff bowing to you." I felt the air leave the room. "Mark, I can explain." "3 years," he said, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and sorrow. 3 years of me worrying about rent. 3 years of Chloe crying because she couldn't go to camp. 3 years of me feeling like a failure because I couldn't give you the life I thought you wanted. And all this time, you were the queen of the valley? It wasn't about the money, Mark. It was about safety, I cried, the tears finally breaking through. My ex-husband was a monster. He used money to control me, to hurt me, to keep me prisoner. When I met you, I just wanted to be Sarah. I wanted to be loved for me, not for my bank account. I was scared that if you knew, everything would change. I was scared I'd lose the only real thing I've ever had. Mark stood up, pacing the small kitchen. You didn't trust me. That's what hurt, Sarah. I thought we were a team. I thought we were building something together. But you were just watching me struggle from your high tower. I used that money to protect you, I shouted. I fought him off so he wouldn't hurt you or the kids. I would give it all away in a heartbeat if it meant keeping this family together. For a long time, he didn't say anything. He just looked out the window at the dark hills. Then he looked at me, and his expression softened, though the sadness remained. We're going to need a lot of time, Sarah. You've saved us from a lot of things, but you've also broken something very fundamental. The weeks that followed were the hardest of my life. I didn't hide anymore. I started by paying off the mortgage on our house, not as a gift, but as a contribution to our home. I set up college funds for Chloe and Leo. I stepped into my role as the owner of the Silver Vine publicly, but I did it with Mark by my side. It wasn't an easy transition. There were awkward dinners and long, difficult conversations in therapy. But slowly, the honesty began to heal the wounds. Mark realized that my secrecy came from a place of deep trauma, not a lack of love. And I realized that by hiding my power, I was also hiding a part of my soul that he deserved to see. Today, Chloe is at that soccer camp she always wanted. Leo is looking at elite engineering schools. And Mark? He's still a history teacher because he loves it, but he's also the head of the winery's community outreach program. He keeps me grounded, and I keep him safe. Sometimes I look back at that scared woman who first arrived in Napa with nothing but a fake name and a hidden fortune. I realize now that the money didn't save me. The winery didn't save me. What saved me was finally being brave enough to be seen, to be Sarah, the owner, the wife, the mother, and the survivor. The secret is out, and for the first time in my life, I can finally breathe the air of the valley without feeling like I'm choking on a lie. We aren't perfect, and the scars of my past are still there, but as I watch Mark walk through the vines toward me, I know one thing for certain. The truth didn't destroy us. It gave us a foundation that no one can ever take away again. Thank you for following this story to the end. If this journey of secrets and survival moved you, please make sure to subscribe and leave a comment below. What would you have done in Sarah's shoes? Until next time.